Donald Lowry got an A1 in technical drawing in his leaving cert and is studying architecture at Bolton Street in Dublin. Yet his parents were told when he was 5 that he should be institutionalized. Donald has a rare form of aphasia, a neurological condition that affects his ability to comprehend sound. Donald is not deaf, quite the opposite in fact. His problem is that sounds, especially voices, are an incomprehensible jumble. I asked his mother Maura when she first noticed her son's difficulties.
Well, Donnie was about 3 years of age at the time, and we noticed that the quality of his speech was changing, was deteriorating. He seemed to be losing the consonant sounds. For example, plain up in sky became pain up in sigh. So the words were changing really. As well as that, he was a little bit groggy, a little bit fluey, you know. So, but 2 or 3 weeks later, actually on the 8th of March, he woke up and he had no language whatsoever, no speech, no understanding of speech. And he was very, very distressed. And I'll tell you, so were we. We knew that something was really wrong. Well, the whole process then of diagnosis began. We brought him to the local Eastern Helport clinic and they referred him to various consultants. There was a difference of opinion as to what was really wrong with him. There was an EEG done eventually, and Professor O'Donoghue diagnosed him as having an acute acquired aphasia, or what he called Landau-Kleffner syndrome, because he was locked into a world of silence, a silence which we could not penetrate. He became very disturbed, socially and emotionally, over the next 5 or 6 years really. And he has since told us, in fact, that every sound that he heard, which he couldn't decode, he couldn't understand it, that each of those sounds re-echoed in his head 5 or 6 times. He had violent headaches, so you can imagine the frustration that he was going through and the difficulty he was experiencing.
The conflict in diagnosis dragged on, and in the meantime, Donald's frustration worsened.
His behaviour did influence some of the medical diagnosis. Not our neurologist, he seemed to be quite convinced as to what his problem was. But the consultant psychiatrist, he seemed to think that his primary problem was an emotional problem, a behavioural problem, and that in fact the language was secondary to that. And there were phrases bandied around at the time like, well, it's the chicken and egg situation, you know, is the language causing the behaviour or is the behaviour causing the language problem? Except that Donald and I knew in our heart of hearts that his primary problem was language and that he had severe emotional overlay because of the lack of communication in the world of silence that he was in and the frustration he was experiencing. So we were in no doubt.
Donald was lucky. His parents could afford to seek help elsewhere. They took their son to New York for a definitive diagnosis and an assessment of his needs.
Well, when we arrived back, we presented the 2 reports to the Department of Education. That's the report on his medical condition and the report on his educational potential. And the Department of Education did not accept these because they were still, I think, accepting the opinion of the psychiatrist and also the pediatrician. So in the absence of a unit, we decided to set one up ourselves outside the system. And that's how St. Angela's Language and Learning Unit was established.
By now, Donald was 8 years old.
St. Angela's was eminently successful. Initially there was a teacher, Sister Patricia Mulcahy, an Ursuline sister, who had a master's degree in remedial language. And we recruited a speech therapist, Mary O'Connor, to work with Sister Patricia in the classroom. It was the ideal classroom set up, teacher and therapist working side by side, ensuring that the children received specialist teaching and intensive speech therapy on a daily basis. We also had a diagnostic and assessment team comprising the neurologist, the psychologist, the teacher and the therapist acting as a team, arriving at a consensus about evaluation and diagnosis, and also monitoring the children's progress 3 times a year.
Donald's dad ascribes his son's academic and social success to those early years in St. Angela's, but the Department of Education remained uncommitted to the unit.
The unit lasted for 7 years. We had to apply for the unit to be renewed every year because initially the department made it a temporary unit and we applied for its renewal each year. We were forced to apply each summer for the unit to recommence on the 1st of September, which was quite a strain. And the department usually renewed it at the last minute, and we were renewed then for a further year. So the unit eventually was terminated by the department in 1992, even though the unit had done excellent work and in fact it formed the model for similar units around the country. His greatest achievement, number one, was acquiring a means of communication, which was signing. Sign language really has been the language of the home here for the most part. He also advanced educationally, learned to read and write without knowing the sound of any letters, which was a major achievement. After St. Angela's, Donald went to St. Joseph's School for Deaf Boys in Cabra, where he was very hospitably accepted as a student in their post-primary school. And when he was there, his reading skills and his skills in general improved tremendously. The staff in St. Joseph's were wonderful to Donald, and they helped him enormously in each of the subjects that he did. And he was able to do his junior certificate in 1994 and his leaving cert in 1996. And he was also enabled to participate fully in all the sports in St. Joseph's, and in the social area as well. He went quite regularly to St. Vincent's Social Club in Drumcondra. He acquired a lot of friends in the deaf world, and he still maintains contact with these friends.
Donald is one of 310 aphasics in Ireland. The condition is most commonly caused by head injury or stroke. Donald's form is extremely rare, with just one new case annually. Can you tell me about your disability? What does sound mean to you? Well, I can hear the sound of, say, cars, aeroplanes, the radio, music, fire engines, etc. But I just cannot make any sense at all out of the sounds of speech. What I mean is, I can hear voices, but I cannot understand anything that people are saying. How do you communicate? I use sign language, and I can read and write with my friends. I have taught quite a lot of my friends to sign, and we can communicate with each other. And all of my family are also able to use sign language. Would you regard yourself as a member of the deaf community? I have some deaf friends in the deaf community, and I have also played soccer with St. Vincent's Deaf Club. Their problem is different from mine. Most deaf people can lip read, and partially deaf people have some hearing and can also speak quite well. It can be a little frustrating for me. Similarly for profoundly deaf people, because they found it a very different experience at school, trying to lip read. They are signers, like me. How does your college facilitate your needs as a student with aphasia? The college provide me with a note taker for lectures, and they allow me to photocopy the acetates in their office. When I'm sitting for an examination, they provide me with an interpreter to help me to understand the papers, and they allow me additional time for each of the papers. What do you hope to do when you graduate? I hope to work with a firm of architects. I did some work with a firm of architects during my summer holidays. And during my time at school, I also worked in another architect's office in Dunleary. Donald's one abiding passion is his love of soccer. His aphasia has not hindered his enjoyment of the game, and his only conflict in recent years has been choosing between Croatia and the Republic in the recent World Cup qualifiers. Donald's success is obvious to all who meet him, but it is the result of years of hard work by himself and his parents, both of whom are all too aware that if not for their own positions, she a teacher and he a county councillor, they would not have been able to push as hard as they have to ensure their son reached his full potential.
Christmas is just 5 days away. Before you really pick out, maybe you should decide about what to do about those post-Christmas blues and learn how to curb your compulsive, obsessive behaviour. Me? I don't have any. But always at your service. I've been checking out a few ways to help you to keep you in your resolution. Anything I like?
Hello, Dr. Collin. Can you tell me about hypnotherapy and how it works?
Hypnotherapy is an altered state of awareness in which the unconscious mind becomes more open to suggestion. Now, we store all our habits at an unconscious level, things like smoking cigarettes, eating chocolate, or eating too much. We store them all at an unconscious level. So hypnotherapy is just guiding a person into an altered state of awareness so that you can change that unconscious pattern. Now, where deaf people are concerned, there's a problem because you guide a person, the therapist is using speech, and they're asking the person to allow their eyes to close. Now, obviously, as soon as, for a deaf person, as soon as the eyes close, all communication is shut off. However, self-hypnosis is a very powerful and effective way of bringing about change for unconscious patterns, so that is definitely available for deaf people.
Thank you, Doctor. Well, that's one method, but what else out there to help people give up their addiction?
Today, how does acupuncture work?
According to Chinese medicine, acupuncture works by promoting the smooth flow of energy in the various channels in the body. And health, according to the Chinese system, would be a complete mental, emotional, and physical well-being. That's it.
How would it help people to give up addiction like drinking or smoking?
Okay, in giving up the various addictions that people have, acupuncture will help to relieve the side effects like insomnia, increased appetite, and anxiety and things like that. And what we would do is put some tiny little needles into the ear and into the body. How do you feel? No pain?
No pain.
I just take my needle and now, did that hurt?
Now tell us how aromatherapy works.
Well, aromatherapy, there are two aspects to aromatherapy. There's the essential oils and then there's the aromatherapy massage. The essential oils, when one massages essential oils into their skin, okay, they have the ability to penetrate the pores of the skin and eventually they go into the bloodstream via the blood capillaries. And so they're sent then to all the organs in the body. Okay, the massage aspect of it is that aromatherapy is a combination of Swedish massage and shiatsu. So it takes the gentle effleurage movements of Swedish massage, combines it with the deep thumb pressures of shiatsu. So the overall effect of the massage is that it's obviously very gentle massage. It stimulates circulation of the blood, drains toxins from the lymphatic system, and has a deep psychological and an emotional dimension to it. Effleurage is always done a few times to begin and end each section.
Tell us about the flotation tank, Peter.
Okay, essentially it's a large enclosed bath with 10 inches of water in it, which is heated exactly to body temperature. And there's about half a ton of Epsom salt dissolved in the water. So it's completely buoyant, like it's twice as buoyant as the Dead Sea. So you lie back and you float in it, and it's dark and soundproof. So there's no sensory input at all. It's like a cross between floating around outer space and being back in the womb. And it can help giving up addictions and stuff like that by balancing up all the bodily systems, you know. It works on an emotional level, on a physical level, and a mental level. So it heals, it allows you to heal yourself, really. It creates a space for healing all of and balancing all the systems of the body, you know.
When that's all for me, good luck making New Year's resolution. I want to float to outer Spain. See you in the new year.
Some commentators accuse the deaf community of displaying all the worst traits of a cult. Others say that it's in danger of alienating hearing people that could help the community. With me to discuss this are Kevin Stanley and Stephen Smith, both self-professed culturally deaf. Hello.
Hello.
Some people say there's no such thing as deaf culture. Can you explain just what is deaf culture?
Let's leave aside for a moment the idea of deaf culture, and first let's consider the meaning of culture, which is a reflection of language and tradition. It's about a community of people who have their own language, own values, history, and so on. The deaf community has its own language, Irish Sign Language. This is the first language of deaf people in the deaf community. It has a heritage, values, identity, and so on, a wealth of features. Deaf culture is something that develops naturally through a people's everyday way of life. Sign language is an important carrier of deaf culture. Deaf people's experience of a natural language, their everyday communication, has been affected by the oppression they have suffered from hearing people, who place no value on sign language. There is literature, i.e. signed literature of deaf people's storytelling about the history of deaf people, legends, jokes, rituals and sign names and so on. There are also books written by deaf people, and this is an important part of deaf culture and heritage. In the same way as within the hearing community, different groups exist, such as black people, Muslims, Asians, etc., each having their own culture. Similarly, we have our culture.
Okay, fine. But do you not think that there's too much diversity amongst deaf people to say that there's a deaf culture?
I would attribute the cause of such diversity to the system of education, because in the past we had a vibrant group of people with a standard language, but the introduction of oralism caused language diversity and confusion and resulted in a range of levels of fluency of sign language within the deaf community and led to the problems that we have today.
To both of you, do you think people view the deaf community not as a community, but as a cult?
Well, no, we're no cult. But I think that hearing people could have that perception of us because we like to socialise together in large groups. We work all week from Monday to Friday surrounded solely by hearing people, and so in the evenings we like to meet up. There can sometimes be a good number of us sitting around in a big circle all signing together, and if we seem reluctant to let hearing people join us, It's only because it's been a long week and we're dying to catch up on all the signed chat. It's just the wrong time and the wrong place to meet us. In the same way hearing people like after a week's work to meet up with their football club or such like. No one thinks it's odd or a worship group or anything, just friends who know each other. There is no such thing as a deaf cult. I would say to hearing people who have that perception of us that it's just a misunderstanding of our way of life. Our natural expression in sign language, to which people need to change their attitudes. I would view the deaf community as a cultural and linguistic minority, the same as other minority groups, like black people, Iranians, Muslims, Jews, etc. They have their own language, their own culture, history, values, identity, etc. I think society recognizes their separate identities and rights, and they should recognize our rights, our language and culture. It's a sad fact of history that some hearing people have actively oppressed our language for many, many years.
We've talked about deaf and hearing relationships, but what about deaf people's own attitudes to other deaf? Some deaf people have oppressive attitudes to cochlear implantees, or deaf people who've been educated in mainstream.
Cochlear implantees, mainstreaming, there are a lot of different issues here, but deaf people are not objecting to these people. They are, however, concerned. It's one thing for a deaf adult to choose to have a cochlear implant, but it's just not okay to implant young children. Parents must think of the consequences in later life, the potential emotional and psychological problems resulting from having had an implant. Research is not complete. There are no guarantees or promises of a better life. There are risks, and further research is needed. So deaf people are worried on health and educational quality grounds rather than social. We know that sooner or later these children will become deaf adults like us in the deaf community. We're just worried for them. That's all.
Okay, fine. But what about the fact that most deaf children are born into hearing families? What about the child that grows up in mainstream education, is living in isolation from the deaf community, has no opportunity to meet other deaf, and the nearest deaf club is miles away?
That's a big problem. If there are no deaf people around and only hearing people, then the child could have a problem of isolation, and it would be difficult to have an interesting conversation. But it would be much easier if they could move to an area with other deaf people. They would understand a lot more. I think maybe the health boards think it's the easier and cheaper option to keep the child at home and attending local school than to move the child to the deaf school. If a child is profoundly deaf, then I think they should definitely be moved to be with other deaf people. But if they can hear speech, they could try things locally and see how they get on. And if that's not successful, then they should move. And if they can speak a little but also sign, they can move to be with the deaf. They have to see how they get on. I don't know.
What if the hearing parents don't want to send their child to Dublin, but want their child to grow up at home in the local area? What about that?
The parents' concern should be for their deaf child.
And what about deaf parents who decide to send their deaf children to mainstream school?
I really have no answer for that question. I think that some deaf parents, having had the experience of attending the schools for the deaf themselves, don't want the same things to happen to their children, and so they send them to mainstream, maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Perhaps, like all oppressed minorities, until we're strong in ourselves, we must guard our cultural differences diligently. Well, this is the last programme before Christmas, so have a good one. In the next programme, we'll take a lively look at the strange things hearing people do when they encounter a deaf person. So see you in 2 weeks' time.
Happy Christmas.